At the base of the Santa Ynez Mountains, on the Southern California coast, lies a series of clay-tiled roofs, evergreen trees, and sweeping sandy beaches. This is Santa Barbara, situated approximately 92 miles north of Los Angeles and with a population of approximately 92,101 residents within city limits. The allure of the Spanish architecture, gastronomy, and coastal views draws in on average 20,000 additional visitors daily seeking to enjoy their piece of the American Riviera. The Mission Revival downtown, the Funk Zone, East Beach, and Stearns Wharf form the beating heart of the city's tourism infrastructure. These destinations, flush with restaurants, bars, hotels, museums, shopping, and recreational opportunities, lie a mere few feet above the crisp, cool waters of the Pacific Ocean. As sea level rise continues to affect coastal regions worldwide due to human-caused climate change, Santa Barbara will inevitably be faced with realities of higher tides and surf as the decades progress. Beaches, parks, local attractions, water treatment facilities, Highway 101, and the Pacific Surfliner Rail Corridor are all at risk. Understanding what this change could mean for the city requires stepping back and becoming familiar with the story of water, both on land and at sea. Before reaching the brackish lagoon adjacent to the beach, water must flow from the canyons of the Santa Ynez Mountains downstream to Mission Creek. This arroyo's freshwater current has long nourished native wildlife, riparian forests, and the Chumash peoples, who for over 11,000 years have inhabited and tended to the lands known today as Santa Barbara. Their lands extend across swaths of the central and southern California coast ranges, including four of the Channel Islands, most prominently Limu, also known as Santa Cruz Island. In fact, according to the Chumash creation story, the birthplace of the Chumash people was out at sea, on Limu. The Chumash people only experienced the vast interiors of the mainland once the Earth Mother, Hutash, determined that the island was getting too crowded with villages and they needed more space to call home. Chumash elder Julie Chumami Sensley, in her retelling of the story, explains that Hutash told the Chumash people to cross a foggy rainbow bridge across the ocean to reach the mainland and felt bad when some people fell off and started to drown. She saved their lives by transforming them into dolphins, thus making them relatives of Chumash peoples to the present day. The ocean is fundamental to Chumash culture, life, and memory. Oceanic crossings between various villages along the coastlines north and south of Siuxtun, present-day Santa Barbara, reaffirmed trade and cultural relations among Chumash peoples while retaining ties with the islands and mainland. Tomos, powerful wood-planked canoes sealed with tar resins from shoreline deposits, for thousands of years proved to withstand the strong, unpredictable currents of the Santa Barbara Channel while rowing between villages. The construction of these vessels, in addition to rowing them in open sea, is a communally oriented and physically laborious undertaking that strengthens bonds between generations of Chumash people. Historically, coastal village sites were situated near shorelines where Tamil canoes could be handcrafted and launched to the sea, such as at Siuxtun, because being oriented with the ocean reaffirms long-standing ties with the water. However, Chumash villages and their traditional customs became a target of a decades-long Spanish campaign to settle and colonize the California coastline. The arrival of the Spanish mission system between 1772 to 1831 meant the establishment of new Catholic institutions, including the Santa Barbara Mission. Likewise, this meant the exploitation of Chumash people to construct the churches, adobes, agricultural fields, and aqueducts needed to prop up this new form of development. Water also became exploited to fulfill the needs of a growing Mission population. The construction of 2 dams on Mission Creek to divert water towards the Mission and increase water storage capacity was undertaken using Chumash labor in 1807. Rather than steward the sacred water available in the region, the colonists sought to control water according to their worldview without providing space for Chumash practices associated with waterways. For instance, the diversion of labor towards agriculture and construction meant less energy and time for canoe making. The construction and use of tumals, once a frequent and daily cornerstone of Chumash life, was almost permanently lost, as fewer members were able to pass on the knowledge to the next generation. Exploitation of water resources on land by the Spanish drove a wedge between the Chumash people and the sea, contributing to large-scale linguistic fragmentation and loss of cultural practices. Nonetheless, the bonds the islands and ocean shared with the fragmented Chumash peoples were never fully forgotten. The memories passed down through members of Chumash families all the way through the present, accumulating in a pivotal revival of Tamil construction rituals. Determined to rekindle human and non-human relations across Chumash communities, Chumash community members organized to undertake the first rowing journey in over a century to reach Lemieux from the mainland in 1976. They were determined to remain connected with the waters that have long tended to their ancestors. Thanks to these crucial first steps, annual Tomol rowing journeys are now undertaken by the Chumash nation to the sacred island, forging bonds between those of all ages, from youth to elders, and healing severed bonds with the sea. As the Chumash people awaken, so do the painful stories of exploitation, loss, and death at the hands of waves of colonization from Spanish to U.S. control. Irreversible damage inflicted upon Chumash people and their non-human relatives still scars these lands. However, they are breaking the silence and embarking on efforts to acknowledge, address, and heal these scars. Systems of domination over water, first introduced in Santa Barbara along with the first waves of settler colonialism in the 1700s, are still represented in the built infrastructure of today's Santa Barbara waterfront. A vacant parcel of land sits still in the open sun, adjacent to the beach and Trinity bars, art galleries, and restaurants of the tourist-centered Funk Zone. Rusted metal fencing, roofs, and concrete lay exposed and barren, a reminder of the site's former use as a construction materials facility. However, the history of the site goes far deeper. This seemingly unimpressive stretch of concrete was once part of the Estero Lagoon. This brackish marshland stretched from the beach inland closer to the foothills of the Santa Ynez Mountains, serving as a buffer for water traveling from the mountains to the sea, and the Pacific tides rising onto the shore. As the town of Santa Barbara grew in the early 1900s, this wetland was filled with terrain to expand the footprint of agricultural and residential development. Today, the former footprint of El Estero coincidentally constitutes the most at-risk zone of sea level rise flooding at the 6.1-foot mark by 2100. A reminder that although systems of domination seek to transform the environment to its will, the water's memory will prevail whenever possible. Current flood control infrastructure, meant to protect the surrounding urban development from fresh water and ocean flooding, includes a concrete creek channel and floodgate to keep brackish lagoon water from filling inland. This design indicates the engineers sought to divert fresh water as quickly as possible during flooding and contain brackish water from the beach so it doesn't travel inland. However, how would this great infrastructure hold up amid a rising sea? Would these tools of control suffice as an intervention to protect these properties? Or is this a form of maladaptation, only prolonging the eventual submersion of critical infrastructure for Santa Barbara residents and tourists? Once the sea reaches the height of the lagoon, would the floodgate become obsolete? According to the City of Santa Barbara Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan, city officials plan to address the forecasted 6.1-foot sea level rise by 2100 through a series of mostly hard infrastructure projects. These include seawalls and raising streets, with some emphasis on retreat and nature-based alternatives like relocating trails, and reinforcing sand dunes. However, nowhere in the action plan mentions incorporating wetland restoration for the purpose of sea level rise adaptation. Imagine if even a remnant of the former El Estero could be revived as a wetland to serve not only as a buffer from the rising sea, but also as a place of environmental and cultural healing. Imagine the Chumash people being able to lead this effort as a continuation of their determination to revive ties with water and land. Imagine this space potentially being a new home for future generations of Chumash people to live, grow, and construct Mortomol canoes with an easy access point to launch into the Santa Barbara Channel, much like their ancestors at nearby Siustun did hundreds of years ago. Imagine this space becoming an antithesis to the presence of the Santa Barbara mission higher upstream, a tangible indication of how working with the water rather than wielding it can foster a world in which injustices can heal and lives can be saved. For this vision to work, the power dynamics of sea level rise adaptation planning would need to change to place greater change-making agency in the hands of the Chumash people. A choice could be made at the hands of decision makers to either uphold the current flood control infrastructure in downtown Santa Barbara, which protects coastal properties and maintains the image of the glamorous Americana Riviera, or listen to the voices of the historically silenced land and people. The rebirth of a wetland with Chumash stewardship in a coastal urban setting could serve as a blueprint for the intersection between land-back movements, the return of land to indigenous caretakers, and sea level rise adaptation. If potentially successful, imagine the multitudes of tallgrass, willows, ducks, and frogs which could find their way back home after over a century of displacement. Imagine the children growing up in a world their elders worked so hard to tend to. Imagine what this restorative future could have in store for the Chumash and Santa Barbara as a whole. It takes ceding space back to those whose lands were unceded.